Welcome to Horror Score. We're your hosts, Jesse and
Vanessa.
And this week's episode is
Storm of the Century,
which is the longest movie we have done so far. This movie clocks in at 4 hours and 17 minutes.
We thought Twisted Tales was long.
At 2 hours 24. And I get it, like this is a mini series. It was, a television event, not necessarily a movie. But we own it as a movie. We always try to own every movie or have legal access to every movie that we review here on Horror School.
We don't just try, we do.
Yeah, we definitely do. Whenever possible, if it's not here, then it's definitely on Amazon, streaming on Shudder. And speaking of technology and stuff, it's been a couple episodes now, but we have an email address in case you want to get a hold of us. We are horrorscorereview@gmail.com.
And our Twitter is @ScoreHorror.
And you can get a hold of us for anything. If you want to be a guest on the show, have a strong recommendation, criticism, or what have you, drop us a line. Would you like to take us into the story of this movie?
Sure.
All right, let's score it up.
It was made for TV. So I feel like they really stretched. It was originally written as a screenplay. And I feel like because they knew that they were putting it as a TV series, they stretched it out longer than it had to be. Definitely could have been an hour and 45 minutes if they just cut out a lot of unnecessary moving in between buildings kind of scenes. But as far as just the overall story, there's kind of that impossible choice, or there's that debate. And I really love stories that do that, where like it kind of makes the viewer and also the characters in the movie figure out what they would do in sort of like an impossible scenario where you have to make like a tough decision and hear the justifications. So I gave it a 10.
10. All right. I love this movie. I think it would be fair to say that this is my favorite made-for-TV movie of all time.
The original It.
Okay. Well, I mean, they're both Stephen King. But I think that this is
Rose Red.
Easily my second favorite Stephen King movie, maybe third. But it's up there. Despite its long runtime, I'm going to agree with you that I think this movie could have been 2 hours, but Stephen King likely was given, they probably approached him and they were like, we need a 6-hour television event with commercials. So it's the middle part that's a little long because it starts pretty fast, and then the ending is solid, and there's just a big gap in the middle. Yeah, I think you could have took some stuff out. But if you watch this on a snow day, if you're snowed in and it's cold outside and you've got something to eat, a warm drink, and you wrap up with a blanket, this is a good way to spend 4 hours and 17 minutes. I gave this a 14 on story, and I have no regrets about that. I like the story, and I love the villain. So I'm going to take us into villain, if you don't mind.
Go right ahead.
All right. His name is Andre Lenoge, and I think that's a really interesting, cool name. The villain does a lot without doing anything. He's very mysterious and brooding. He's a complex character, and he's one of those Stephen King omnipotent folks who seems to know everything about everyone in the town. And when we see him, the people of the island of Little Tall, they like to, it's in Maine. It's a small island in Maine, like most of Stephen King's stories taking place in Maine. It's the same island from Dolores Claiborne. They use their first and last names a lot. And I think that's one of my favorite parts is most of the characters have very believable New England names, like Martha Clarendon,
Robbie Beals,
Mike Anderson, the guy who owns the grocery store and he's the town constable, Peter Godso. Can you think of any others off the top of your head?
Ursula.
I think it was also Ursula Godso. She might have been Peter Godso's. The names of the characters are great. And I do like the villain a lot. This is kind of a high score. I saw this in 1999 when it came out on TV. Like I stayed up and watched it all 3 of those nights. But I'm going to give Andre Lenoge a 16 out of 20 horror score points in villain. Yeah, I think he's great. Great villain.
Well,
what'd you give him?
Well, Andre Lenoge got 13 points out of me because I do agree. He was great. This guy, I want him to come to my town. He's like the call out king. Like because he knows like every bad thing that every person has ever done. And so it's awesome to just like walk with him through a supermarket and have him just be like, that guy's a homophobe. Like, that guy over there, like, cheated on his wife. Like, she doesn't pay her taxes. Like, just went down the line and called out, like, every talented person. And so I thought that was really neat. But also, he has this transformation that happens in the movie a couple times that they show, and I thought it was, because he's an omnipotent character, right? So
yeah, he's one of those, yeah.
Yeah, it's one of those kind of ageless, timeless people, but they do some practical effects transformations with him that I thought were really neat.
Well, what about horror? You want to go into the horror category for this movie?
This is my lowest score for this movie, probably because it was made for TV. Obviously, they couldn't go crazy as far as the deaths and the body count, but there were a lot of bodies in this movie, so you didn't get to necessarily see a whole ton of crazy killings, but they definitely stack up.
I agree.
A lot of bodies for a made-for-TV kind of movie. I gave it 8 points.
I also gave it 8. Though I like this movie, there is a ton of characters, and a lot of times it feels more like a mystery than a horror, but the movie is still billed as a thriller, horror, mystery, and I even think sci-fi on IMDb. I'm not entirely sure. I like the ties that the movie has to Roanoke and some other of history's mysteries, but it was low on horror. Now, the cast is so big, too, that you've got so many people that there's not a lot of opportunities for, someone to be alone for a good creepy scene. There's no jump scares. So I felt 8 was appropriate. There's a few deaths, but I don't think there's been a cast this big in a work that Stephen King has done since Needful Things. That was a pretty large cast as well. Well, I guess that takes us to effects. Effects, sort of a lower category for me. I gave it 11 points on effects. Now, I was going to score it lower until I realized that like all of the snow in the movie is fake. So they're getting this massive storm and like none of it's real. I guess it's all like tissue paper and like those giant fans I read, blowing it all around. So
Wait, did you originally think that it was real snow?
Yeah, I guess. I mean, I just didn't think about it. Like when you're watching The Shining, like that scene at the end, like it never crosses my mind that that's probably not real snow. Like you kind of get lost in the movie and you're watching it and you're just like, yeah, that's fine. This movie does have good models. Like there's a lot of buildings that get destroyed and they're just little models, but you forget when there's like waves coming in, the storm surge, and I gave it 11 points. Some of the CGI is very like late 90s questionable, but I gave it 11.
I gave it 9. There is, because I loved the island of Little Tall, and it's very believable, tiny little general store, then lighthouse, and it just kind of felt very true to small Maine island town. So I thought the set was great, but there are some, like you said, yikes CGI moments. Like there's a flying scene, and I'm like, oh no, you didn't have to do all that. There is some good aging.
Yeah.
And some good, like, when somebody, like, sees a ghost kind of thing, and, like, their whole physical being is changed and altered because of it. Something kind of like that happened that I thought was effective.
I kind of forget sometimes, like, when a movie doesn't appear to have a big budget, that sometimes the budget was still way bigger. I guess this had a $35 million budget. So part of me when I look back is like, where did that money go? Like, I guess they, they rented out this huge part of town and had these huge crews and had to pay the actors, and there was a huge cast. But yeah, it was a $35 million movie. So I don't know, do you want to wrap us into our last category, the S factor, where we can award extra bonus points for any reasons we want to?
I do. I've got a few. I gave it 9 points, which isn't the greatest, but so one of my favorite villains is, and I'm going to put that in quotation marks because Hannibal Lecter isn't necessarily a villain.
Just some.
Yeah. Buffalo Bill was a real villain.
Yeah.
But there was this very, with Andre Lenoge, there was this very, it was like an homage to Lecter's scene from Silence of the Lambs, where Andre has a cane and he's kind of doing this like beating motion, and he has these prison bars shadows like across his face while he's doing that, and it was very much like that scene obviously in Silence of the Lambs when Lecter is beating the prison guard to the classical music, that kind of thing. So they did a good job in making him one of those more intelligent villains that are my personal favorite. There's an old woman in this named Cora, who she's just a great character. She's a hilarious, entitled,
very cynical
old woman. Yeah, very cynical. Great. I would play canasta with her any day. But yeah, I really gotta love a villain who's just like calls out pedophiles and homophobes and everything, and makes people kind of repent for their sins, even though they think they're good people. So it got 9 points for me.
All right. I gave it 11. And for me, I always liked the lead role, the character, Mike Anderson. Mike Anderson. You know, they say his name over and over in the movie. It sticks to you. It's a name that you don't forget if you've seen this movie.
Robbie Beals.
And
Martha.
I kept thinking, like, why haven't I seen this guy in more stuff? Like, he did a good job with the lead role. So I had to look him up, and I was like, oh, like, he has been very busy. But he's been busy as the voice of Superman and Clark Kent, starting in 1996 through, like, 2013. Hundreds of times as on like the Adventures of Superman cartoon, even the video games where his voice was done for a while. So that earned some S Factor bonus points for me. And then again, the references to Dolores Claiborne. I read that based off of the timeline of all Stephen King's novels, that Dolores Claiborne at this point should be on the island somewhere while all this is going on. That was kind of cool. And Andre Lenoge's cane was the same one used by Stu Redman, played by Gary Sinise in The Stand. And it has been a long time since I've seen The Stand, which is like a 6-hour movie event. They like played that for 5 straight days, I believe, when it first came out. So that's where we score this movie. But before we total our points up, as usual, we're gonna hop over to Vanessa's 1-sentence synopsis.
Hey, where's that funky cat at? Andre Lenoge says, hell is repetition. But he wouldn't have to keep repeating himself if somebody would just ask him what he wants.
So we're going to total these up. That gives me 59 points for Stephen King's Storm of the Century.
And it got 49 points out of me, which is a total of 54 score points.
Not bad. Not that bad. All right.
Speaking of accents.
Yeah. In this movie, you get a lot of great main accents,
ones.
And you get some bad ones.
Some garbage ones.
And I always wonder when I see a movie that takes place in Maine or Boston, is it that hard to find some actors that are from this area?
It's an easy accent to screw up if you're just trying to.
And you can tell, like, there's a few painful lines where you're like, ugh. I have to be very careful. Like, if I don't think about it or I get around the right people, my accent gets away from me, and I'm clearly from New England. Yeah. And sometimes, like, when
I'm
a couple
of drinks,
thinking about what I'm saying, I can keep it under control a little bit more. Let's see. I wanted to make a plug before we go. Just remind everybody at home that there is a podcast out there that you may want to check out. It's called
Make Me Shudder.
Yeah, and they are reviewing every movie in alphabetical order on the streaming service Shudder, which we really enjoy. So you may want to check them out. They're on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and maybe more platforms to come. So, do you got anything else?
No.
Well, that's it for us from today. So give us 15 minutes. We might save you 2 hours.
Stay spooky.